Heston Russell, a decorated Australian Special Forces commando.
We carried the Australian flag on our arm, and we were there representing more than us.
He proved fearless in battle, iron-willed in his personal convictions.
I kept my sexuality a secret for my entire career.
And prepared to put it all on the line.
Talk about facing pure evil on earth.
There's no way you can truly understand what combat is like unless you've been involved in it.
But his judgment day came when he returned home and faced his fiercest enemy in an attack launched by the ABC.
This Australian soldier is firing towards what appear to be unarmed civilians.
It's pretty apparent to everybody involved in that mission that they had just killed a prisoner.
Heston's battlefield this time, the Australian Federal Court.
My experience with the ABC is they fight to the death.
He's so brave, standing up for his men.
Mum was crying, her face was so red, and she just threw her arms around me. And she said, "I thought I'd lost you."
So is he a war hero?
I felt like I was fighting for my life.
Or war criminal?
Good evening, I'm Michael Usher and welcome to Spotlight. This week, following 3 years of inquiry, the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide delivered its report. No surprise, it details how successive governments, the Australian Defence Force, even the Defence Department itself, have all miserably failed Australian veterans. In tonight's program, we investigate how another of our national institutions, the ABC, has also had a hand in doing some serious harm to an Aussie digger. Former Australian Commando Heston Russell is a highly decorated officer who led soldiers into battle, campaigned for the establishment of this Royal Commission, built charities for soldiers and even ran for a seat in the Queensland Senate, but has been caught in the crosshairs of the investigations unit of the ABC. Well, several years after his discharge, he was targeted and tormented in a relentless attack that alleged he was the worst kind of soldier, leaving a trail of destruction in Afghanistan and involved in fraudulent behaviour back home. Liam Bartlett investigates.
Heston.
Oh, man.
How are you?
Good, you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good to see you.
You too. Maybe, we'll see.
Are you ready to talk about this?
I think so. It needs to be done. I mean, what else have I got to lose over this?
Helmand province in the south of Afghanistan was known to be a Taliban stronghold and a centre for opium production that helped fund the insurgency. In support of the American-led coalition, Aussie commandos were successfully deployed on numerous special operations missions to capture intelligence and destroy enemy positions.
It's currently 2 fingers to the right of that edge.
This was the theatre of war that Heston Russell stepped into as commander of the 2nd Commando Regiment's November Platoon.
What are we looking at here?
So this is a mission in Helmand. This footage is the actual combat helmet cam footage taken from my signaller. As per every single mission we go on, you're given the task, but given the purpose, the reason why. And that was, to disrupt or destroy an insurgent network, to destroy or neutralise funding that was helping to, fuel terrorism around the world. And what we're actually doing in this is inserting onto 2 insurgents that have been on a motorbike, driving around shooting at my soldiers. So we insert 3 soldiers who immediately go after the guy who is riding the motorbike.
Well, they're pretty gutsy too. They just disappear into the cloud of dust.
Yeah. So it's us watching this guy run towards the compound. So we've maintained positive identification of him both directly and with drones in the sky, running down this alleyway. And a tactic we'd employed to great success is firing a warning shot in the vicinity of someone to make them stop, freeze, put their hands up essentially.
Why did he fire a warning shot? If he'd been shooting at Aussie troops 5 minutes before, why didn't he just try and kill him?
Well, look, the majority of our missions derive their greatest value from capturing insurgents. After the warning shot, this insurgent has run into a compound and the drone has witnessed him bend over and pick up something. He's picked up something that looks like a weapon. And you'll hear me telling my soldier, shoot him, shoot him. If we listen closely, you'll hear that. Then you'll see that's the footage of my guy shooting at him in the compound. The US door gunner sees him and points to him, and we're circling around. And you'll see the yellow smoke that he dropped to mark the target to help designate the building and help us to be able to maintain a direct line of sight with all the dust and everything flying around. But again, concurrently, we have assets in the sky watching this guy.
So sort of circling, trying to find...
Yeah. And at this time, I've given the order that we're going to go in and land on the ground. Just given how complicated the terrain is, myself and my signaller, I've given the order that we're going to go in there and try and follow this up directly. Now here, my signaller sees him, sees he's unarmed, and instead of shooting, after I've already authorised him to fire, actually tells him to stop and get down. And watch this. The American door gunner says, "What are you doing?" Knowing full well that I've authorised him to kill him. My soldier could have got a kill up, could have got a notch on his belt. But instead, my soldier made the decision to save a life because knowing we're going to land and go and try and capture this guy. Then that's me putting the headset down and putting my helmet on so we can go pursue this guy on foot. And here we are.
You're now out of the chopper.
Out of the chopper, so he moves directly. I've had to move around from the other side of the helicopter, and I'd always take the lead on the ground, so that's me there, moving into the frame. Some cracks start to fly, and those cracks are the sound of bullets passing overhead or passing about a metre past. And what actually happens is, as we insert, we start taking fire, we start getting ambushed by 2 or 3 insurgents that are actually just off the picture to the north of this position.
I've got to say, very open ground there. You're very exposed. None of your men were injured that day?
No, no one was injured this day. It was actually a very successful mission.
So you thought that was all great? Really? I mean, you thought that was successful from a commander's point of view?
Absolutely.
We definitely walked up that alleyway into that compound.
Those few minutes of continuous video recorded on the helmet cam of Heston Russell's signaller tell the real story of what happened on that mission against the Taliban in late 2012. But some 10 years later, in 2022, the ABC chose to selectively use just 15 seconds of it to paint Heston and his men as the worst type of soldier. A 15-second snippet that told a very different story.
While the commandos faced some of the fiercest fighting in the long Afghan war, the footage reveals some less heroic acts as well.
The ABC's allegations of Aussie commandos shooting at unarmed civilians from a helicopter are published in online news stories and aired on its flagship 7:30 program.
We don't have the vision that comes immediately before this, but this Australian soldier is firing towards what appear to be unarmed civilians in residential compounds.
And they're saying that you're shooting at unarmed civilians.
And this guy had literally just been on the back of a motorbike with his mate shooting at 2 of my teams that were on the ground.
But we don't see any of that.
No, nor do they, but they're still happy to jump to a conclusion from 15 seconds worth of footage.
But later the claim came that it was you shooting.
Their entire truth defence was based on them saying that this was me shooting out of the helicopter.
Heston not only shared the complete, unedited version of his signaller's helmet cam vision with us, but in April of last year, well before the trial began, he made sure that the journalist making the allegations, Mark Willesee, had full access to it, so that he and the ABC's investigations unit were able to clearly see what really happened.
This is the exact footage that my legal team provided to the ABC and their legal team just prior to our trial, when on 3 separate times they kept trying to rely on their truth defence, saying that this was me shooting out of the helicopter.
You gave this footage...
This raw footage.
...to them to prove it, to say, listen, have a look at the truth.
2 things. First and foremost, it's not me. Secondly, here's the full context. They were not unarmed civilians.
Incredibly, the ABC refused to acknowledge it. So in September of 2022, Russell commenced defamation proceedings in the federal court to defend himself against their accusations of war crimes.
Even after we gave the ABC this footage, the narrative is that I was shooting at unarmed civilians.
The reporter, Mark Willesee, is saying, we don't know what happened before this, but he does. He's known about it since April last year.
Yep.
For a year he's known.
Yep.
So what's online, what's up on the net is a lie.
Absolutely.
We've come to Savannah in Georgia to talk to the one soldier who can, better than most, independently verify what happened on that mission. You see, US Army Chief Warrant Officer Alan Dennis was the guy behind the controls. He was the pilot of the Black Hawk helicopter that Heston Russell was sitting in. And incredibly, he's never talked about that day until now. We're going to find him and have a bit of a chat.
What do you remember about missions like that with November Platoon? What were they like?
What was called the Aerial Reaction Force. And sometimes, you know, we'd go out and there'd be absolutely nothing going on. And then other days we might be taking fire, or, you know, they would end up taking fire after we insert them. Most of our one-on-one interaction was with Heston. And then usually we'd get up with platoon in the aircraft. You know, most of the communication was with Heston.
But you rank him highly?
I held him in the highest regard out of everybody I worked with. I thought he was the most professional commander that I had the pleasure of working with downrange. You know, I spent a year in Afghanistan during that deployment, and at no point during that time did we ever think that any of the engagements were illegal or unethical or
outside the rules of engagement.
Absolutely. So,
did anybody try to call you? Any journalists from Australia? Did they try to get in touch?
No one ever tried to call me or contact me about it. No, sir.
Nobody?
No, sir.
But despite even the support of military colleagues who fought alongside him and validating video evidence, the accusations of war crimes and wrongdoing persisted for almost 3 years.
So where did it all go wrong?
2 days before I discharged in January 2019, I was actually called before the Brereton inquiry. The next thing I was told that my decision to allow my soldiers to fire warning shots instead of killing people had opened all of my soldiers up to being prosecuted. And I mentally and emotionally broke in that room. I was shown the footage of the helicopter shooting, and I was in such an emotional state that I said it was me shooting.
Why did you admit to that when it wasn't you?
I thought it was. I was in such a worked up emotional state.
So you think that's the key, do you?
Well, I actually think that's the Trojan horse, that someone within the Brereton inquiry, confidential source A, told the journalist Mark Willesee that was me shooting from that helicopter footage.
whatever the problem with their so-called sources, the result for the national broadcaster was ugly. Justice Michael Lee ruled against the ABC, finding that they had caused Heston serious harm and ordered they pay him nearly $400,000 in taxpayer money in damages.
And the fact that they knew the truth, the fact that they knew Heston was innocent, and then they filed a truth defence, meaning we say that he is a war criminal, we say that he is a murderer, contrary to all of the evidence, that is shocking.
Next, when one shot isn't enough.
They've literally added extra gunshots.
The dark art of turning a hero into a villain.
I fell off my chair when I saw this.
Plus, the US Marine whose accusations triggered the downfall of a decorated commando.
So it was pretty apparent to everybody involved in that mission that they had just killed a prisoner.
And the journalist who trusted him.
You know, there's this idea that we make shit up, and we don't.
They did.
Literally made shit up.
Retired Special Forces Commando Heston Russell spent almost 3 years fending off the ABC's allegations of war crimes. One place where he was able to find some peace was his dad's property in the Aussie bush.
When they bleed, then they're ready. Yeah.
Thank you, Lord, for this food. Thank you for bringing John and Heston here safely, and may you give them travelling mercies home. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
When did you first realise that you wanted to become a soldier?
Oh, I grew up in a military family. I was born here in Sydney and moved up to Brisbane when Dad was posted up there. My grandfather and my nana on Mum's side were in the military, and my great-grandfather and great-great-great-grandfather on Dad's side. But all of the aspirational male figures in my life were all either in the military or sons of Dad's military mates.
As well as a proud lineage of military relatives, Heston's own service included 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan and a 5th to Iraq in the fight against ISIS.
Welcome to the Heston Russell Military Museum.
Yeah, a bit of memorabilia I've collected over the years.
Enlisting in the Army at 17, he rose to become a highly decorated officer with over 10,000 hours of leadership in combat operations.
This is a whole coin collection, so...
have you got enough of them, do you think?
Yeah, right. So my first deployment in Afghanistan, I actually took Prime Minister Julia Gillard. I was her personal security officer. And then when we were flying back, she gave me this coin.
She gave you that?
Yeah. I told her I couldn't take it, and she said, I absolutely insist.
Wow.
And it's a pretty rare treasure. It was a very unique time, very unique insight into who she was on a personal level.
That's a very nice gesture, isn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Russell could never have imagined that the road from his first deployment in Afghanistan would have taken him to the steps of federal defamation court so many years later. Or that even as he was suing the ABC, their investigations unit would continue a campaign of damning stories, and that publications, like The Guardian, would happily repeat the smears. The ABC published a story alleging that he shot at unarmed civilians from a Black Hawk helicopter in 2012.
You can imagine me sitting here when I've already commenced legal proceedings and this gets published.
But just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. In a way that would please any producer of Hollywood fiction, the ABC took Heston's story to another level. Video sequences in online news articles made it look like the shooter was taking pot shots at a couple of unarmed men running for cover.
Why is that music underneath?
So what this footage was actually taken from is an end of deployment compilation video that one of our guys put together from a bunch of our helmet camera during the deployment. Highlight reel, yeah.
Right.
The Commando's highlight video reel, complete with its anthemic underscore, provided the foundations for the ABC's online news story. But it took a significant detour from reality. Because in the actual helmet cam vision, it's a warning shot, then Heston's command to shoot. Followed by 6 shots. Revealing an astonishing difference between the source vision and the version of events told by the ABC's Mark Willesee, which starts with 6 rounds of firing. Then, the single warning shot becomes 6.
To me, it appears some of these figures are out.
They've literally added extra gunshots.
That's phenomenal. So
I fell off my chair when I saw this.
To get to the bottom of how it could be that Aussie commandos were portrayed as shooting more shots than they actually did, we took all of the vision to independent forensic digital audio expert James Raper.
are you happy with the chain of custody here? Are you happy with the source of this material that you have?
I'm absolutely 100% confident in the audio that you have provided for me, as well as the video footage. And the news clip I took directly from their website and from YouTube.
James analysed the sound waves from the original helmet cam video, the Commando's highlight video reel, and the ABC's online news publications.
So we can hear that there's one distinct gunshot in that footage. Now,
the warning shot
the warning shot
Heston talks about.
That's correct, that's correct. That one gunshot lines up perfectly across both the helmet cam footage and the souvenir video. This changes when we get to the news clip. If we listen to it, we'll be able to hear 6 distinct gunshots.
This is like the magic pudding. So we've added another 5 gunshots.
That's what the evidence points to. They've taken the audio from the 6 shots and they've applied it to this video in the news clip, and they've copied and pasted across this scene. It completely misrepresents what those soldiers were going through that day.
Were you surprised when you did the analysis and saw and heard what you were looking at? I mean, we're talking about Australian troops here, firing or not firing against real people.
Yeah, I was surprised. More than that, I was quite shocked.
It also makes you wonder what else has been fabricated, doesn't it?
Correct.
Believe it or not, this concocted shooting sequence was not part of the defamation case pursued by Heston. This false narrative was published during his trial. The trial that saw Heston awarded nearly $400,000 in damages began some 3 years before. That was ignited when celebrated ABC investigative journalist Mark Willesee published a story that relied on the ear witness account of an American helicopter door gunner who went by the pseudonym Josh. Josh described a mission where Aussie soldiers allegedly captured 7 prisoners, but the extraction chopper could only accommodate 6.
And you just heard a silence, and then we heard a pop, and then they said, okay, we have 6 prisoners. And so it was pretty apparent to everybody involved in that mission that they had just killed a prisoner that we had just watched them like catching hogties.
And he's on a helicopter, not on the ground, but a helicopter that's flying.
So he was in a Huey gunship that provided aerial fire support. And he's out the side, manning a machine gun, wearing night vision goggles.
So he's seen all that and he's heard all that from a hovering helicopter, has he?
Who knows what over the years his mind has decided to tell him is what happened that night.
You were not named in that story, but you took it very personally.
Well, they named November Platoon. They said it was during 2012. I was the November Platoon commander. So they did name me because they named November Platoon and I was the commander.
Josh, the American soldier, hoped to remain anonymous to avoid retribution.
It's recording. How do I check
but
that, Alex?
Curiously, his face and voice went to air in the ABC stories. Even more unusual were Josh's own warnings to Mark Willesee about his credibility in emails.
My memory is pretty hazy, so I can't really give you anything specific.
About his decade-old memories.
I don't even remember who it was I was flying with for sure.
And about the whole story. To top it off, Josh's recollection of the time frame was another red flag.
When the ABC published their article saying this happened between June and July, and I produced my deployment record that showed we weren't even in Afghanistan during that time period.
Willesee's own memory wasn't much better. At the prestigious Walkley Awards, in a featured conversation on stage with another investigative journalist, Chris Masters.
I spent 2 months working on a particular story involving, a US helicopter crewman, and he told the story that they were out in an operation, they dropped their commandos. Then it was time to pick them up, and, they radio in and said, we've got 6, our guys and 6 prisoners, and, the chopper pilot, he heard it through the communication, said, well, we've only got room for 5. And then, yep, we're good, we've got 5.
He published a story that said 7 turned into 6, and on stage he said 6 turned into 5.
And I spent 2 months checking out, going back to this guy, getting more detail.
That's a fairly big mistake, wouldn't you think?
It's not accusing someone of being a shoplifter. It's not accusing someone of, jaywalking. It's accusing Special Forces soldiers of being war criminals.
There's this idea that we make shit up, and we don't.
He makes the point on stage. He says, look, you can't make this shit up. But your trial proved...
Literally.
They did.
Literally made shit up.
We asked the ABC if they added extra gunshots to their online story. In a bombshell admission to us only late Friday, the ABC acknowledged they'd made a mistake, telling Spotlight, "We have removed the online video where an error has been identified based on preliminary inspection of the audio. The ABC is seeking more information on how this occurred. Joe Pacini, Mark Willesee and Josh Robertson had no role in the production and editing of the online video you have brought to our attention. Any suggestion that they've acted inappropriately or unethically is completely false."
Next, the collateral damage caused by the ABC's relentless pursuit of Heston Russell.
All up then, what do you estimate that this has cost the taxpayer?
And just when you think things can't get much grubbier in the fight to clear his name.
And the ABC contacted people through a gay troll forum and then published one of those images.
There's more monuments and memorials to war veterans in Washington, D.C. than in any other city in the US. And that's appropriate because that's why we've come to the Capitol to talk to an American vet who was used by the ABC to criticise Aussie commandos. But Brett Hamilton says his carefully selected words were selectively used to twist the story, and he wants to set the record straight.
Brett Hamilton.
Hey.
How are you?
Hey, it's good to see you, Leo.
Good to see you, Brett. It's a long way to come, but, you know, you've got this all ready for me.
Yeah, you ready to go? Want to go for a flight?
You serious?
Absolutely.
The highly decorated US Marine and DEA agent says his interview with the ABC was secured on the basis that he would be talking up his combat interaction with our Aussie commandos and telling the world what a great fighting unit they were and how proud he was to be deployed alongside them. But Brett says the conversation was selectively cut to make it sound like he and his Task Force 66 did not want to be associated with Heston Russell's November platoon in any military capacity.
Your position on this came across in stark fashion that you didn't want to work with Heston's platoon because there was an underlying sense of suspicion.
Oh, that's exactly how it came across. Absolutely. That's how it was edited. That's how the interview was edited, correct.
Can I play you what went to air?
Sure, yeah. I said, look, I would prefer to stay with Oscar platoon. I think they're more in line with RMO, and I think it would just be better for everyone if we were stuck with one platoon.
You just got by TF-66.
Yes, they should definitely be investigated. We've got to be able to show that we've held our soldiers accountable. So the comment that was made just prior to that comment was, if there's legitimate and concrete evidence that a crime's been committed, yes, they need to be investigated. But the way this is edited, it makes it sound like, you know, I'm saying that these guys need to be investigated, and it infuriates me.
And it wasn't true?
It was not true, no. Look, had we thought there were ethical concerns with anyone within Task Force 66, we wouldn't have worked with them. Not with any of them.
With any of the Aussies?
Absolutely not. There's no way on earth that a group of special agents with the DEA would have risked their own reputations being associated with someone we thought was unethical. We wouldn't have done it.
What would you say to people who are sitting in their armchairs, sort of trying to work out how you interpret a war crime accusation?
God, yeah, that's hard. It's just, everything can go to shit at the drop of a hat. Before you make these accusations, you have got to have so much more evidence than you would typically in a domestic setting. There's no way you can truly understand what combat is like unless you've been involved in it.
Corporal Scott Smith was an engineer and a member of the Special Operations Task Group. He was the only soldier that Heston lost in Afghanistan, and he died on the 21st of October 2012. The ABC's article was published on the very day of the 8th anniversary in October 2020.
How did he die?
He detonated a zero metal content pressure plate IED and was blown into a million pieces over 300 metres.
Scott was commemorated on this last Anzac Day dawn service by his family at North Bondi.
People talk about the Anzac spirit. I watched guys fighting for their lives, fighting to protect others who were picking up Scott. I sat back and I was inspired by the most magnificent men I've ever met. And they are the men on that day that the ABC published an article to call them war criminals. And that is something I will fight to the death to defend as long as I draw breath.
But despite Heston's fighting spirit, the accusations that Aussie commandos had killed an Afghan prisoner in order to make space on a helicopter persisted for over a year. And the national broadcaster continued to make the public believe the allegation was true by doubling down with more stories based on non-existent evidence, which ABC staffers, including Investigations Unit boss Joe Pacini, tweeted about.
The ABC told the public that there was an active criminal investigation into an Aussie commando unit, which had been confirmed by the Defence Department. And yet the very next day, the Defence Department said that's not true.
They went as far as saying against the Australian commando unit accused of executing a prisoner because they wouldn't fit on a helicopter. They linked the two stories together in that exact statement. And you're right, the Department of Defence came out straight away and said, you know, we haven't confirmed that.
That's a big call to make, isn't it? That's a big lie to publish.
Massive.
But the impact of the public pressure was driving Heston to the edge.
I felt like I was in the middle of a conspiracy.
It was around about this time that I was hosting a radio talkback program, and I contacted the ABC's investigations unit to ask if one of them would come onto the show to discuss the Heston Russell saga. Well, no surprise, they didn't agree. But during the court case, an email emerged from Joe Piccini, the head of the unit, briefing Mark Willisey on how to manage a potential conversation with me. Can I read that to you? Do you mind?
Please.
So, Liam, you'll appreciate that I can't comment about that while there's an ABC investigation and other police investigations going on into this matter. Or something like that. Something, says Joe Piccini, that might freak Heston out a little.
Yeah.
They harassed him. They were cruel. I don't know why they targeted Heston. Is it his sexuality? I don't know.
Freaking Heston out was certainly on the agenda. And now another journalist from the ABC's investigations unit, Josh Robertson, was on the hunt for dirt.
I kept my sexuality a secret from my entire career, and I never wanted to be the first gay commando, let alone the first gay commando officer.
Auntie's digging revealed that Heston had an OnlyFans account, and he was using it to raise funds for a veterans charity.
This OnlyFans saga came out of a period where I was seeking affirmation, I was seeking acceptance, and I was not in a good mental state. And I allowed my pursuit of affirmation to get in the way of my logic and reasoning.
Former soldier and Values Party founder Heston Russell lied about selling porn online while fundraising for veterans charity.
So the ABC actively hunted for a nude picture of you?
Absolutely. Josh Robertson contacted people through a gay troll forum and got them to go and screen record and screenshot private messages that I had sent to them, and then published one of those images on the ABC News with my genitals blurred out.
So let me ask you the question straight out. I mean, were you guilty of dishonest conduct to a veterans charity?
I don't believe so.
The agreement was they didn't want money if it was going to come from a pornographic picture.
That's incorrect. I have messages from the Swiss 8 guys saying, hey, we need the money and whatever you're doing is obviously working.
You knew the underlying agreement was for not using risque content.
Yeah, that would be a fair assumption to make. Yep. I made an assumption that the money coming into them is what was the priority, and I chose to be dishonest and not telling them that I had started sending private pictures to someone else, but I did not believe that it was their entitlement to know.
But Heston, what were you thinking? What possible good could have ever come out of you getting your kid off and taking shots of you holding your weapon and selling them for money? Because the OnlyFans story, I've got to say, it all looked pretty grubby.
Terrible. Absolutely. But I will not have anyone put any shame on me for my adult decision to take photos of myself and provide them to people privately.
They just kept at him and at him and at him, like they were just trying to push him to the edge. I've lost 3 family members in 3 years, my mother, father and an older sister, and it felt like they were trying to push Heston off a bridge.
Were you worried about his mental health to
Definitely,
any
yeah.
great extent?
Yeah.
When the OnlyFans story became public, Barbara heard from worried friends and relatives, and she rushed to see her son.
I woke up to the intercom of the apartment I was at buzzing. I couldn't even recognise the voice on the end. It was my mum. Sorry.
You're right, mate. You can be as rough and tough as you like when it comes to your mum. It's another world, isn't it?
It was my mum. And she was crying. And she said, "Heston, is that you?" I was like, "Yeah, Mum, it's me. What's wrong?" She's like, I need to come up. Please let me up." And she came up, only a few levels. I opened the door. Mum was a mess. Mum was crying. Her face was so red, and she just threw her arms around me. And she said, "I thought I'd lost you."
You're my boy.
So, my mum.
I don't want to lose him. No.
It was that bad?
Yeah, oh yeah, it still is. Just couldn't even think of a life without Heston. He's so brave. He's very courageous in what he's doing, standing up for his men. And he's achieving that, he's doing that. And that's what my mum, my dad, all of us want him to do, tell the truth.
Next, the bills we all have to pay for the ABC's vengeful crusade.
They need to care a lot more about taxpayers' money.
And their refusal to accept the blame.
My experience with the ABC is they fight to the death.
And later...
How many insurgents did you kill?
Rebecca Giles is the go-to solicitor, with a reputation for taking on high-profile, high-stakes media cases.
I think the personal attacks were so hurtful to him that potentially there was a hope that he wouldn't survive them.
It was July 26, 2022, when Giles and barrister Sue Chrysanthou took the first step in the defamation case and lodged their concerns notice on Heston's behalf.
My experience with the ABC is they fight to the death. So I knew it wouldn't be a small undertaking.
But that concerns notice offered the ABC an easy exit, to simply remove the articles and apologise. Amazingly, the offer was refused.
How much could it have cost them? Bearing in mind when I say cost them, I mean cost us.
A few grand.
A few thousand?
In fact, at the beginning, Heston just wanted it taken down. And he wanted an apology. Cost nothing.
What followed was months of litigation and, ultimately, victory for Heston Russell and his platoon's reputation. But Giles says it was obvious the ABC had launched a doomed mission from the beginning.
It's clear to me from the documents that were before the court that Willisey received some information that suggested that Heston was a bad guy. And then he worked backwards to construct this story.
Willisey says that Russell only felt targeted because he was, as Willisey put it, extremely thin-skinned and very sooky.
I mean, and that is just shocking gaslighting, in my opinion. I think that there is a terrible hypocrisy here that, you know, Willisey and the investigative journalist team at the ABC, it's their God-given right to speak truth to power, but no one is allowed to speak truth to them.
Heston is no stranger to speaking truth to power. He'd been lobbying on behalf of veterans since his discharge in 2019 and has made plenty of noise of his own in Canberra. But the trail of destruction that the ABC had made of Heston's military service also found its way to Parliament House. And it stuck in the craw of Senator Sarah Henderson as an ongoing topic of interrogation in Senate estimates.
Mr. Anderson, I would put to you that it's not in the public interest to make false allegations about someone being a war criminal. What do you say to war veteran Heston Russell, who the ABC wrongfully accused of committing a war crime?
Senator, if you're asking for me to apologise to Mr. Russell, I'm not going to apologise to Mr. Russell.
This is a shocking reflection on the ABC and its culture. This has dragged a man through the mud, destroyed his reputation, which he had to go and fight for.
I was just horrified by what little value the ABC placed on the reputation of a serving member of our Defence Force and his platoon.
This is a very important lesson, frankly, to all journalists, but particularly to those journalists at the ABC. This is absolutely unacceptable conduct, and this should not be permitted under any circumstances.
You're very experienced in this area of law. Has there been many cases like this that you've seen and thought, wow, that surprises me?
Yeah, look, there's been a couple, and I have to say, they've always involved the ABC. But this is one that is I'm flabbergasted by, just the cost to the taxpayer. It was hopeless from the beginning to the end.
All up then, what do you estimate that this has cost the taxpayer?
Well, if you include the ABC's internal legal costs, I think you would be looking at something close to $3.5 million.
$3.5 million?
That's right.
So where do we go from here? Do we just both sort of sit here and say, oh, well, you know, $3.5 million taxpayers' money up in smoke?
I think the ABC needs to care a lot more about journalistic excellence, and they need to care a lot more about taxpayers' money. And the fact that David Anderson can sit in Senate estimates and not apologise is frankly disgraceful.
Coming up next, we seek answers from the ABC's elite investigations unit.
I expected for these people to have lost their jobs.
And the questions they should have asked.
How many insurgents did you kill?
It's been a long 3 years for a digger who might well have thought he'd receive the respect and gratitude of his country after a decorated career, including active combat.
Saw the stress, but I didn't understand it until the day outside the courtroom when he won the case.
When you walked out of court that day, when you had the verdict go in your favour, you looked as though, obviously, you were very relieved.
Yeah.
You weren't, you know, completely joyous.
Well, I expected the very next day, as if it was me who'd been found to have done something deliberately wrong in my military career, for these people to have lost their jobs, for the head of the ABC to apologise to my soldiers, to their families, to my family and to me.
Well, I'm standing here in a court of defamation trying to fight for the legacy of my soldiers, including one that I could not bring home.
You wanted somebody to pay the price.
Accountability.
And for the record, we've given the ABC's investigations unit every chance to be accountable. We wanted to question Mark Willesee and Joe Piccini, even Managing Director David Anderson, and try to discover why they were so keen to throw one of our brave, decorated war veterans under the bus, and then refuse to apologise even when they were found to be in the wrong. All of them have refused to appear on camera. Not really surprising, given Justice Lee was highly critical of their failure to publish Heston Russell's side of the story in the first place. So we thought perhaps we should put the questions to Heston that they should have. Do you think any of your men were ever involved in an unlawful killing?
No, I do not. Hand on my heart. And if they do, I am the commander. I'm the one responsible. That is how command and leadership and these relationships work.
Did you ever see anything that you thought was untoward?
No, I didn't. And the biggest missing piece of this whole narrative is, Liam, we went on every single mission in Afghanistan with Afghan partner force.
How many insurgents did you kill?
You want to do this? Personally, I killed 7.
7? You counted them?
You do.
Before he passed, Heston's grandfather left him with some final words.
He simply said, "Don't let them do to your soldiers what they did to mine when we got back from Vietnam." And that is when the weight of my whole ancestral lineage weighed on my shoulders. And I refuse to let these people get away with these actions. Because if I can't stop them, who can?
We first contacted the ABC in June for comment on tonight's story. You can read their full statement on our website. If any veterans watching tonight have been affected by the issues raised in this episode, remember there is help available. You can contact Lifeline and the details are on your screen. That's all we have time for this evening. I'm Michael Usher. Thanks so much for your company and good night.